My name is Michael Leidy. I am the Director of Public Policy for National Nurses United. National Nurses United. All right, there you go. And it is my honor to welcome you here tonight to an extraordinary event, a conversation with Senator Bernie Sanders, hosted by John Nichols. This is the opening event for the 10-year celebration of the Progressive Democrats of America. It's my honor to serve on the PDA Advisory Board, but there can be no greater honor than to open this weekend in the memory of Tim Carpenter. As we like to say in Tim Carpenter Presente, we are going to turn the old maxim around. We are going to mourn and we are going to organize. Because Tim would not want it any other way. And of course, it will not surprise those of you who knew Tim that his last full tilt project was pushing a petition to get Senator Bernie Sanders to run for president as a Democrat. We'll have a lot of time this weekend to talk about the issues that animated Tim's lives, that are central to the transformation of our country toward justice and equality. And we'll have opportunities to talk with each other. But tonight, we start with two of the leaders of our movement, of our progressive movement, and that the values and the passion that Tim dedicated his lives to are those of the extraordinary senator from Vermont. Having grown up in Brooklyn, Senator Sanders moved to a somewhat less populated area where he spent decades organizing a community-based independent politics that showed the country how to make social and economic justice real in a typical American city, and that was, of course, Burlington, Vermont. And he was its socialist mayor. Now consider that description for a minute, socialist mayor. As John Nichols has schooled us in his terrific book, there was a time when cities throughout the U.S. were well governed by what the practitioners of this municipal model in Milwaukee called sewer socialism. And that was a government dedicated to ensuring people's health and well-being, because of course good sewer systems at that time in the early 20th century were literally a matter of life and death. Now Bernie was at the far end of that era. He was mayor in 1981 to 1989, and it predated the current resurgency of urban social democracy, right, that we see in Pittsburgh, New York, and Seattle, and elsewhere. But he was at that point where ideology gets real. He was in that show-me crucible of urban life. He was independent, pragmatic, building a commonwealth, delivering quality public services, and engaging residents in participatory democracy. Those are the values and the practices he brought to Congress for 16 years, serving as the at-large member from Vermont. Now, he faced Republican and Democratic opposition 10 times. And once in the House of Representatives, Bernie Sanders founded the Progressive Caucus, the largest caucus in the House. And that legacy lives on. You might say it takes a socialist to show Democrats how to be progressive. Now, the Progressive Caucus, the champions for peace, for redirecting military spending toward eradicating poverty and fighting hunger, toward creating good jobs, ending HIV/AIDS, that was the caucus which Tim Carpenter perfected the PDA inside-outside strategy, where the movement meets the policymakers and builds a new kind of power. And we'll be celebrating and extending that legacy this weekend. And now Bernie Sanders represents the great state of Vermont in the U.S. Senate and millions of other Americans as he takes on the banks, fighting the corporate money that tries to take over our politics, and demanding single-payer health care. That's right. And most importantly, Bernie remains committed to delivering on the promise of government, that it can be a force of good to address the needs of working people, to expand Social Security for a secure retirement, to eradicate poverty, and to make the wealthy pay their fair share. Like the mayor he was, Senator Sanders is the progressive who delivers for ordinary people, the ones who built this country and who gave of themselves to defend it, because he is chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee of the United States Senate, where he works tirelessly for a responsive and humane system for veterans. My union represents Veterans Administration nurses, so we know the struggles he takes on when he deals with those issues to improve that system. And with him, we fight for single-payer health care. We know the challenges he takes on. Senator Sanders retains his faith that government closest to working people can meet their needs and act in their interests. He believes the government must be by and for the people, not of the corporations and for the wealthy. Sounds like a pretty good reason to run for president, don't you think? Senator Sanders is our 21st century Eugene Victor Debs, champion for justice, organizer for peace, and if we are lucky, Democratic candidate for president. To introduce Senator Sanders and carry us through tonight's event and conversation is the intellectual guiding star of our movement, John Nichols. John is the foremost analyst of American politics on the American left today, and I guarantee you he knows every mayor of Milwaukee, or who was the mayor at least, that he is a contributor to The Nation, and you've seen him on MSNBC, Democracy Now!, many of the important media outlets that give voice to our movement. He makes his home, of course, in Madison, Wisconsin, where he writes regularly for the Capital Times. As you know, John was mentor, advisor, prodder, and dear friend of our hero, Tim Carpenter, with whom John planned tonight and this amazing weekend. Tim and John worked diligently with others here in Northampton to make all this possible. John's wicked humor, wry worldview, and unshakable belief in the American promise of freedom, justice, and equality inspire us all. He happened to write my daughter's favorite political book, Dick, by a certain, I think it was vice president? And he wrote one of my favorites, The S Word, which is apropos for tonight. Please welcome the incomparable John Nichols.
Anybody who knew Tim Carpenter knows that Tim always overestimated. Tim always imagined that he could take the biggest room in town and fill it. And I just want to thank you tonight for proving Tim Carpenter right. Look around at this crowd here this evening. This is fabulous. What a wonderful, wonderful testament to Tim Carpenter. I do not read from documents when I'm in front of a crowd of people very often, but I want to read a short bit from the introduction to Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. And Walt Whitman said, "Not nature, not swarming states nor streets and steamships, not prosperous business, nor farms, nor capital, nor learning may suffice for the ideal of a man." Tim Carpenter, who we will honor over the next 2 days, Tim Carpenter showed us what the ideal of a man could do for a country. And I just want to say, they've talked about me helping to put this together. This was Tim's dream. And Tim said one thing to me at the start of the process. Now, we kind of blew the schedule a little bit, because the point was that Tim was supposed to be here. But Tim said, my great hope is that as we gather, we can have a sit-down, a serious conversation with the man who Tim thought should run for President of the United States in 2016. It was Tim's dream that Senator Bernie Sanders would come to Northampton to meet with the people of Northampton. And Tim did pass away. But he passed away knowing that Senator Sanders had accepted his request and had come to be a part of this dialogue. Not someone giving a speech, but someone interacting with progressives to find out what they think as much as what he has to say. Brothers and sisters, there will be no greater honor to Tim Carpenter than the gathering we have tonight, and you are a part of it. You are such an important part of it. And let me give you one more line from Walt Whitman before we welcome Senator Sanders. Walt Whitman wrote that the greatest thing about America, of all the great things, was the terrible significance of their elections. The president taking off his hat to the people, not they to him. I know, that's pretty good, isn't it? The president taking his hat off to the people, not they to them. When I cover American politics in the spirit of our dear friend Tim Carpenter, when I look for those who don't ask the people to take off their hat to him, but who takes his hat off to the people, I think of the senator from the neighboring state of Vermont, and I am proud to welcome to our stage this evening, Senator Bernie Sanders. We get ourselves as comfortable as we can tonight. Senator, you may want to get that microphone where you're comfortable. We are in Northampton, Massachusetts, and decided to find a nice middle-of-the-road town. Senator, I want you to know that in the crowd tonight is Frances Crowe. And Frances Crowe is 95 years old. She's right over there. And there hasn't been a civil rights demonstration or an anti-war protest you've ever been involved in that Frances wasn't there first. And there are so many other good folks here tonight who've come to join us in this conversation. I am cautious about where to begin. But I think the best place to start is to ask you, and we're going to go into some of your background, some of your own history here. But I want to begin, you're clearly a United States Senator. There's no doubt of that. You got the badge on.
That's the thing.
You know? But you came up as an organizer. And as we gather here, we honor the memory of Tim Carpenter, but we also honor the idea of an inside-outside strategy. Someone who may sit in a position of power, may walk those corridors of the Capitol, but also who sees a role out organizing and talking to people. I'd like you to begin by putting yourself in perspective there a little bit and give us a sense of where you draw those lines between being an organizer and a senator.
Well, let me, first of all, begin by thanking all of you for coming out. Thanking Tim Carpenter for inviting me, and obviously we're all dismayed that he's not here to join us, but his spirit is in the room. John, I want to thank John. I think many people don't know that the guy over here is plays an extraordinarily important role in the progressive movement. I mean, John is everywhere. Yes, he deserves that. Let's give John a hand. He is an incredible writer. I try to write sometimes, and I can't believe how fast he writes and how well he writes. So, John, thanks for all that you do. Let me answer your question in this sense. My life is my life, and I try to look back, and, you know, I was born in a family that never had a lot of money. We were never terribly poor. My father dropped out of high school, came from Poland when he had no money. My mother graduated high school, never went to college. We lived in a small apartment in Brooklyn. My mother's dream was to own her own home, never happened. My father worked every day of his life, worked hard. He was a paint salesman, never made a whole lot of money. And my brother and I were lucky enough, they were very proud that my brother and I were able to go to college. So I think I would start off, the first point that I would make, and the most important point, is that whatever I've done in my life, writing, being mayor of Burlington, congressman, U.S. senator, I have always believed from the bottom of my heart that everything that I do and what I say represents the vast majority of the people. Sometimes I think there are progressives out there who think, well, we're fighting for social justice, we're this, we're that. It's too bad that we're in a minority, but someday the majority will catch up with us. I've never believed that for one moment. Everything I'm going to tell you tonight that John and I are going to discuss, everything I've ever talked about, every idea that I've ever espoused, I believe is what the vast majority of the people of our country believe. And the real fringe group, the real minority, are those folks, often from the billionaire class, who want to give huge tax breaks to people who don't need it and cut back desperately on programs that people do need. That's the fringe. And so when I was elected mayor of Burlington, what did we do? How did we run the campaign? We just went out to the community, went out to the low-income community, and we said, look, city government is not addressing your very serious needs. We went out to parents and we said, is the city government doing enough for the kids in the community? And one of the people who came out on that turned out later on to be my wife, Jane, who's sitting over there, and later became head of our youth office. And we talked to the workers, the employees in City Hall. And we said, do you think you're getting a fair shake from local government? They said, no. We said to the women in the community, do you believe that City Hall has been opened up to women? And they said, no. And we talked to the environmental community, and they said, no, we're not doing enough. And you add all of that up, you know what you got? You got the vast majority of the people. Now, does every one of those groups agree with every other group on every issue? They don't. And the first point, when we talk about organizing, that we have to understand is that within this room, there are people who have a whole lot of differences. So what? That's life. As my wife will tell you, she and I have a lot of differences. Probably some of you and your spouses and partners may have differences. But the important point is not what divides us, but what brings us together. So, John, you know what? I've been going to the South lately.
I know you. South Carolina a week ago.
I have never, for 1 second, accepted this nonsense about red states, blue states. I don't believe it for a second. In every state of the country, you have working people, you have low-income people who are struggling to keep themselves alive economically. They are on our side. And you can't ignore those people. I was in South Carolina recently. I was in North Carolina, the Mississippi. There are good, decent people there who want to make sure that we create jobs for all Americans and have health care for every single American. Don't accept that division. We are the vast majority of the people. The Koch brothers and their friends are a small minority. Never, ever forget that.
Before we take you down the road of the Koch brothers, and we have some wonderful people in this room who've been doing all kinds of organizing on issues that relate to money and politics. But I want to take you back a step. You mentioned that you were born in Brooklyn.
Yep.
and raised in a working class family. You went to the University of Chicago with Milton Friedman, I assume. Yeah.
Me and Milt.
Yeah, and well, he's starting to look like a liberal now. But you went to the University of Chicago, and this is something I've known you for a long time. I've covered you in a lot of settings. I didn't know until the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington that you had gone to the March on Washington, and that you had actually been, even before it, kind of organizing back there in Chicago. So that made me wonder, when did you go progressive on us?
That's a good question.
Where did that come from?
That is a very good question, and I wish I could tell you there was some profound event. I think when I was growing up as a kid, and I should tell you that my parents were Democrats, but they weren't politics. They voted Democrat. But politics was not an important part of their lives. My brother got active in groups. He went to Brooklyn College, and I learned something from him. But it's interesting when you talk about the University of Chicago, where I did go. When I went there, I was really quite overwhelmed. And it was a very difficult place for me to be there, because I was around a lot of kids whose parents were doctors and lawyers and business people and everybody else, and it really was difficult to fit in. And I would tell you that in my experience, I hesitate to say this here near the campus of Smith College, but most of what I learned was off campus. I became involved in the civil rights movement with some wonderful people in Chicago. I got arrested as part of the effort to desegregate the schools in the city of Chicago. We were then active. Some of you who are my age may remember CORE, Congress on Racial Equality. You remember that? Mm-hmm. And what we did in Chicago, we worked with our brothers and our sisters in SNCC in the South. We tried to get them some money, but we also organized in the South. We took on segregated housing, segregated schools. And I will never forget walking down, I think it was 57th Street in Chicago, putting up little posters announcing a meeting against police brutality. And I'm putting it up, and I'm putting it up. Little did I know there was a police car right behind me taking them down. And the officer stopped me, and he showed me the leaf. He said, "You put them up?" And I said, "Yeah." And then we went into the outside agitator and all of that stuff. But I learned during that period, we worked in the Student Peace Union, learned a little bit about foreign affairs, got involved in the Young People's Socialist League, learned a little bit about democratic socialism. So I would say, and spent half of my life reading in the basement of the Harper Library. They were an excellent library. So I didn't do terribly well in school, but my education was, in fact, the dean there suggested that I take some time off to think about what I wanted to do academically. But I was surely not a star student. But I learned mostly from wonderful people who had a lot of life experience, and that was really my introduction to politics.
And it's a good spot at which to mention the S word. You said you joined the Young People's Socialist League and YPSLs. And in the early 1960s, there were not that many people right on the cusp of Joe McCarthy deciding to go to meetings of socialists. What attracted you? What was your interest? Where did that come from?
Well, a couple of things. It never occurred to me that it was a good idea that a few people had so much and so many people had so little. It never occurred to me that it was a good idea that you had bosses who had enormous power and working people who had very little power. And by the way, the situation today is much worse than it was then. And then during that period, I also learned that there were social democratic governments throughout the world that were doing some pretty good things. And I hope during this evening, John, we'll be discussing not only some of the really advances that social democratic societies have made, but media as well, because I think to understand where we are as a country, to talk about the need for a political revolution also requires us to talk about the function of media and corporate media in American society. But one of the travesties about media is that very few people in this country know some of the real advances that have taken place in countries around the world. They're not utopia. Many of you have been to Finland and Denmark and Sweden and Norway. Not utopia. They have their share of problems. But you know what? They have gone a long way to eliminating childhood poverty. That's pretty good. All people in their country have health care as a right. That's pretty good. They don't pay the tuition that parents of Smith College students pay to go to college. In many of these countries, college education is free. They have strong retirement programs. So they haven't created utopia, but they have done some enormously important things that we should look at. And the sad thing is, very few people in America know anything about that. Last summer, I invited the ambassador to from Denmark to come up to Vermont. And I'm the only, I am sure, member of Congress that's done that. Why did I do that? Turns out to be a really nice guy. And I said, just like this, we're standing up there. I said, Mr. Ambassador. And we did town meetings in Burlington and Montpelier and Brattleboro.
I'm afraid they're going to come and arrest you for
There
doing
we go.
There we go.
And I said, Mr. Ambassador, what percentage of the people in your country come out to vote? Oh, last election, 89%. Oh, Mr. Ambassador, do they have TV ads, ugly 30-second TV ads? And he thinks, I don't think we do any TV at all in terms of elections. Mr. Ambassador, how much does it cost for people in your country to get health care? Hard question to understand. Of course it's free. You know, so we had hundreds and hundreds of people coming out to those meetings, and we have to learn. Are those countries perfect? No. Are small, pretty heterogeneous, homogeneous countries the same as a big country like the United States? No. But what it does tell me is that if we get our act together, we can make huge changes in lowering poverty, improving education, providing health care to all people, and strengthening democratic institutions. So if you want to talk about democratic socialism, you know, there is already something that we can learn from some of the Scandinavian countries.
Now, there's a good chunk of political pundits in America. They're sending the cars for you now, I believe. But there are a good chunk of political pundits in America who would say that you just finished off your candidacy right there for anything, including Mayor of Burlington, probably. Because the way that our media talks about the range of ideas that are available in this country is to essentially say, and I believe Jeff Cohen, who started Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, is in the room tonight. Jeff Cohen right there. Jeff Cohen once said, yeah, one of the great commentators on media in this country. Jeff Cohen once said the range of debate in the United States goes from GE to GM. But there is a certain element of truth to the fact that our media has a terribly hard time with somebody coming along and saying, you know, there are ideas that don't get talked about much here that might be good ideas. You've worked on media issues for a long time. You've been very, very interested in them. I'm interested in the extent to which you have thought about how hard that is, and also, how do we deal with it?
If I only knew the answer. And it's something I struggle with every single day, including today. We had a rough day today. And I want to thank Jeff. Jeff and I worked together many decades ago.
Bernie Sanders has worked with half the people in this room at some point over the years.
All right, here's what you got. And you see it every day. I'll tell you a funny story. I'll start off. Maybe it's not that funny. I thought it was pretty funny. Here's the story. As John mentioned earlier, or Michael, and I want to thank Mike for his very generous introduction before, I helped found the Progressive Caucus when I went to the Congress. During the Clinton-Gore years, they were nice enough to invite the Progressive Caucus to the White House. So we had a meeting with them. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. It seemed startling to me then. It's not now. This is the early 1990s. Al Gore is sitting there. Clinton and Gore were there. And Clinton says, you know, Al, in a few minutes, the media is going to come in and do its thing, take pictures, see if we're alive. And then they're going to have their one question of the day. And then Clinton says, It's unbelievable. Al always knows exactly what the question is. He says, Al, what's the question going to be? And I can't remember exactly what it was, but Al says, da 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 da. A few minutes later, somebody walks in representing all the media, and he asks this question. It was exactly what Gore had said it would be. So I'm thinking, how does this happen? Well, if you hang around Washington long enough, you understand that there is a herd mentality. You can come pretty close after you're there to know pretty much what the issue of the day is. But and it's never, for example, I can tell you the issue of the day, but this is, I've been in Congress now for 23 years, all right? 16 in the House, 7 in the Senate.
Pretty long time.
And I'm still alive. There you go. All right, there you go. Ain't beat me down yet. Now, in all those years, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have more people living in poverty today than any time in American history. Do you think, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of reporters in the Beltway, has one reporter ever asked me, Senator, what are you going to do to eliminate poverty? Never happened, not in 23 years. Has one reporter said, Bernie, what are you going to do to make sure that health care is a right for all people? Never happened. So the most fundamental issues that face our society, as John just said, are very often not discussed at all. But what I have the joy of knowing, because I get around the country, because I see a whole lot of people, is to know that most Americans do believe that health care is a right, not a privilege. So my point is, and I can, if you wanted me to bore you for hours, I can go through this. We had to take on, should I bore you for a few hours? All right, here we go. You made the mistake of coming, you're going to pay for that mistake. Give you an example, all right? And John, you can shut me up whenever you want. We'll go on to other matters. All right. 2 or 3 years ago, you had Pete Peterson. Anybody here knows who Pete Peterson is? Pete Peterson is a Wall Street billionaire. And he has an obsession with trying to cut Social Security. That's been his lifelong obsession. He has spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to cut Social Security, hiring a lot of front groups and so forth and so on. We had every Republican in the United States Congress saying, we need entitlement reform. They don't have the guts to say we should cut Social Security. They call it entitlement reform. That's for the 12-second soundbite. What they mean is cutting Social Security. You had a number of Democrats talking about cutting Social Security. You had the President of the United States talking about a chain CPI. Now, when you hear the rhetoric is Social Security is going broke. Social Security is causing the terrible deficit that we're in. That's why we need to reform Social Security in order to save it. That's it. I saved you a whole lot of listening to a whole lot. That's it, in a nutshell. It's lie, and it's lie. Social Security has a $2.6 trillion surplus. Social Security can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 19 years, I think. Social Security, as all of you know, is paid by the FICA tax. It does not have anything to do with the deficit. Lies, lies, lies. But here's the good point. Here's the good point. We were taking on people, you remember Bowles and Simpson?
Oh, yeah.
Bowles is a Wall Street Democrat, Simpson a right-wing Republican, and they came forward and said, we need this so-called chain CPI, which is a fancy term for cutting Social Security. Everybody believed we should cut Social Security. Some of us started a caucus in the Senate called Defending Social Security. We worked with senior groups. We worked with the veterans groups because they were going to be impacted by these cuts. We work with women's groups because women would be hit harder than men. We work with disability groups. We got the word out that these folks were not telling the truth. And do you know what happened? Today in the United States Congress, nobody is talking about cutting Social Security. And that's because we were able to organize and because we were able to break through the lies. Now, that's not so easy to do. And narrative, I am working very hard. I know these things, this is my life, the U.S. Postal Service. I don't know that people stay up nights worrying about the Postal Service.
I think,
All right, they do.
Can I just interrupt you for a second and say, A, you heard the round of applause. The truth of the matter is, I have heard few issues that actually excite people outside of Washington more and excite people in Washington less than privatization of Social Security, or privatization of the post office. And what strikes me about it is that gets to the heart of our problem, because you can talk and talk and talk about it, and you come out here and get a round of applause for it, but you have a terrible time not just with the media, but also with even your fellow members of Congress kind of getting through to them sometimes on this issue.
Well, sometimes. But let me talk. What I want to do now for a moment, and maybe I'm going off too far, one way or another here. But I want to talk about media narratives. I suggested Social Security, that was the narrative. It was a lie. Every 3 or 4 months, you're going to see front page stories, U.S. Postal Service going broke. Email has replaced first-class mail. Social Security deeply in debt. We need Postal Service reform. That's what you read every day. Is that true? No. And again, I know everybody is not staying up nights worrying about the Postal Service. Here's the point. This year, the Postal Service, in terms of operating profit, will make close to $1 billion in profit. More money will come in than will go out. What's their problem? In 2006, under Bush, there was a requirement that they have to put about $5.5 billion a year, pay out 75 years of future healthcare retiree benefits in a 10-year period. The only entity in the United States, public or private, maybe in the world, that has that burden. If you take away that burden, they're making $1 billion a year. You know it, I know it, there's virtually nobody in the corporate media has made that point. So narrative after narrative, Social Security, it's the postal. Right now we're dealing with the Veterans Administration. I'm chairman of the Veterans Committee. Let me tell you some news. The Veterans Administration provides very high-quality health care, period. Is it? It's not perfect. It is good quality health care according to the veterans themselves and according to a number of independent surveys who have looked at it. It's not perfect. It runs 151 centers. Today, 200,000 veterans get health care through the VA. There is right now, as we speak, a concerted effort to undermine the VA. So the point is, you have government entity itself, Social Security, enormously popular, Medicare, enormously popular, Postal Service, popular, VA, popular. What are the problems? The problems is that all of these are large governmental institutions. And you have folks out there now, Koch brothers and others, who want to radically change the nature of society and either make major cuts in all of these institutions or maybe do away with them entirely.
Challenge with Bernie Sanders is every other politician I ever interview, they are delighted to talk about themselves and what they're doing, who they are. Bernie Sanders, you can't keep him off the issues, and which is good. But I want to bring you back into something that I think relates to issues, but also relates to your experience. When you got up to Vermont as a young man, you ran for statewide office a couple times on an independent third-party ticket, and you lost really badly.
Really bad.
You were wiped out. Yeah.
Totally.
And you were fast on your way to becoming the left-wing Harold Stassen, and then you decided to run for mayor of. You brought it back local. You decided to run for mayor of Burlington. And you told me an interesting thing. I'm interested, the candidacy for mayor, but I'm also interested in a fascinating thing, at least to me, about your mayoralty, which was a huge part of what you did was try to increase voter turnout, to try and make sure that people actually came to vote, because I think you figured out along the way that when you brought a lot of people to the polls, even someone like you might win.
Well, let me restate that and then kind of turn it upside down here. What I believe in is coalition politics. It's what I've always believed. And I think the vast majority of people have common interests. What very smart people like Karl Rove and others have tried to do with success is to take a room where take a room or a country where the vast majority of the people share common interests and divide them up. You divide them up by race, you divide them up by gender, you divide them up by sexual orientation, you divide it up whether you own a gun or you don't own a gun. You do 50 different things until finally you get people voting against their own best economic interest. And these guys work day and night. They poll, they do focus groups. How could we possibly get working people to cut their own benefits? How can we get working people to send their own jobs to China? How can we get working people to vote so that they will not be able to provide a college education for their kid? That's pretty hard to do. But they have been very smart in coming up with issue after issue, what we call wedge issues. Now, in terms of what we did in Burlington, we brought groups together who had a lot of common interests. We won. And I should tell you that I defeated a 5-term Democratic incumbent, okay? Defeated a Democrat. When I ran for, and they said, the Democrats, oh God, how did that happen? We'll get them next time. This is a fluke. Well, next time a Democrat and a Republican ran, and we beat them pretty badly. Next time a Democrat and a Republican ran, beat them pretty badly. Last time I ran, they combined both parties around one candidate. We beat them as well. But here's the point, John, to kind of turn what you said a little bit on its head. Yes, you got to bring people together to win elections. But what John is referring to is, I often say, I'm proud of a lot of what I've accomplished in Burlington and Washington and so forth. But I often think back that in 1981, when I won, 1983, we have 2-year terms, I ran for election, we came close to doubling the voter turnout in those 2 years. Came close to doubling the voter turnout. How did we do that? Well, what we did is pay attention to the needs of low-income and working people. Historically, their streets were paved last. Snow was removed from their neighborhoods last. Their kids didn't have after-school programs. They did not have access to the waterfront, whatever it may be. We paid attention, and you know what? At the end of 2 years, people said, I didn't know that. Government can actually do something for me. I'm going to come out and vote. Now, right now, how does that relate to where we are at this moment? At this moment in American history, in 6 months, there's going to be an election. The pundits tell us, and I don't know if it's true or not, that the right-wing Republicans who control the House will continue to control the House, and they say the Senate is up for grabs. Democrats have to defend a whole lot of seats. Republicans can win, Democrats can win, up for grabs. What they also tell us, that in this coming election, voter turnout will be approximately 40%. 60% of the American people will not vote, and for lower income people, people without a whole lot of education, that number is 70 or 80%. Got that? So you're living in a quote-unquote democracy where for working people and low-income people, 70, 80% of them are not going to participate in this enormously important election. If the voter turnout in this election went from 40% to 50%, Democrats would regain control of the House and gain seats in the Senate. The problem they face is that tens of millions of people do not know, do not care, have not been led to believe that government can work for them. So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, what we showed is that government can work for people, and when people see that, then they're going to come out to vote.
When you started to go up the ladder in Vermont, running for higher office, having been mayor of Burlington, you could have made the choice that an awful lot of people who come up through grassroots politics make, and that is to join one of the major parties, even if you weren't particularly affectionate toward either of them. You chose, remarkably enough, to keep going forward as an independent, as someone who is not affiliated with and would not take the nomination of either party. Why did you choose to do that, and why do you continue to identify as and choose to run as an independent?
Well, let me say this, and it says a lot about my state. My state had the courage, and it was not so easy, to send me to the House and then the Senate, making me the longest-serving independent in the history of the United States Congress. And I'll tell you why. I mean, the answer is pretty obvious. You have heard, and as we talk, you'll know what I believe. Clearly, the Republican Party has become a right-wing extremist party, in my view. I have not much in common with that. And the Democratic Party is kind of a split party, as I think you all know, too. There are some, I know a lot of the guys in the House, and I know the people who are in the Progressive Caucus. You have people who are really working day and night, 7 days a week, fighting for working people. They don't get on NBC or CBS every day. They are, so don't, when anyone tells you there's nobody in Congress working hard, that's just not true. Keith Ellison or Al Grijalva or Pete DeFazio or many, many others. Maxine Waters, you got a lot of people out there who are working really, really hard. But at the end of the day, if you ask me, does the Democratic Party itself in its totality represent what I believe? Are they vigorous enough in standing up for working people? Are they tough enough in taking on Wall Street and corporate America? The answer is no. And I have felt it easier to be honest with the people of the state of Vermont, saying, well, look, I caucus with the Democrats. There's some great Democrats there. But at the end of the day, my views are very different than many people in the Democratic Party.
And this week, I should say, you, to some extent, showed how you were different, not just from a lot of Democrats, but frankly, from a lot of people in the United States Senate. Because when the new head of the Federal Reserve came to meet with and report to your oversight committee, you asked her if the United States had ceased to be a capitalist democracy and, in fact, had become an oligarchy.
And you don't think most members of Congress would ask that question?
I don't know if most members of Congress know the word oligarchy, but what was interesting to me was that the head of the Federal Reserve did not shoot back at you and disagree. And it was, to my mind, one of the more remarkable exchanges in the recent history of our Congress. Not overly covered by the media, by the way, but I'm interested in what, if for nothing else, I would say that kind of justifies the 23 years in Congress.
Well, look, here's what I said, and I know Yellen a little bit. And, what I said is this. Look, when you have the kind of wealth and income inequality that we have in America today, and that is the top, in terms of wealth, top 1% owns 38% of the financial wealth. Who knows what the bottom 60% own? Who wants to guess? 5? 2.3. This guy's cheating. He probably went to my website. Yeah, I did. All right. So you got the top 1% owning 38% of the financial wealth. The bottom 60% own all of 2.3%. Now, you don't see that on NBC or ABC too often. And for obvious reasons. In terms of income, in the last few years since the Wall Street collapse, 95% of all new income has gone to the top 1%, okay? So the people on top doing phenomenally well, middle class disappearing, more people living in poverty than ever before. Then, on top of all of that, we have our friends in the Supreme Court who recently decided that corporations are people through Citizens United and through McCutcheon. So that means that the billionaires now can spend as much money as they want on the political process. So, if you look at the income and wealth inequality that we have, where so few have so much and so many have so little, and you look at the political process where billionaires are now capable of spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to buy and sell politicians, you tell me, are you living in what should be called a democratic society, or are you living in an oligarchic form of society? I think you are, and that was the point that I made. And that is, with the exception of climate change, another unbelievable issue we have to deal with, or else the planet doesn't make it. But in terms of domestic politics, the question of whether or not we can take on the oligarchy and build a strong middle class and build a democratic society where the average person is delighted to participate, feels empowered, rather than sitting home and allowing the billionaires to rule. That is, to my mind, the central issue of our day.
Senator in the second row from the great state of New Hampshire is Marcia Moody, who's a state representative up there. She's trying to get New Hampshire on board to amend the Constitution of the United States to overturn Citizens United. It's a fool's mission, or what do you think?
Okay, Marcia, I think I have some good news for you. I was just at a meeting yesterday, with Tom Udall and a public citizen and some other folks. And what I believe will happen within a couple of months is I have a constitutional amendment. Tom has one. There are a number of them out there. We're going to come together around one amendment with good, strong language. It is going to come to the floor of the Senate, I believe, within a couple of months. And we have no illusions, given the fact that the chairman of the Republican Party and many Republican leaders now think the Supreme Court did not go far enough. You understand that? Citizens United was not enough. McCutcheon was not enough. Now what they want to do is end all restrictions on campaign finance. That's what Clarence Thomas had in his his decision in McCutcheon. That is what the leadership of the Republican Party wants. And you know what that means? That means the Koch brothers don't have to worry about independent expenditures. They can now give that money. They can give $50 million to Jeanne Shaheen's opponent in New Hampshire. They could do whatever they want directly. And I have to make this point, because it's maybe the most important point I want to make this evening. People do not understand what their money is about. The Koch brothers today are worth $80 billion. Some people say more. Under the very oppressive economic regime of Barack Obama, which has strangled free enterprise in America, their wealth grew by $12 billion last year. Obama and Mitt Romney in the last presidential election each spent a little bit more than $1 billion on their campaigns. These guys made $12 billion more last year. For them to spend $2 billion or $5 billion is like you going out for dinner. It is chump change. They have the capability of buying the United States government. They are zealots. That is what they want to do. So they are now spending quite freely. And then, you got the Sheldon Adelson, who's a pauper, only worth some $20 billion. And you saw the primary that Adelson had in Las Vegas last month, where he invited possible Republican candidates, and said, if you do what I want you to do, I'm going to give you a couple of $100 million. This is what I need. That is the state of American democracy. And that's why campaign finance reform, public funding of elections, overturning Citizens United is enormously important. Now, here again is the good news, is that poll after poll tells us it's not just progressives who think that billionaires should not buy elections. It is conservatives, it is moderates, it is Republicans, it is Democrats. So we're going to give you some language that you can mobilize around in New Hampshire, in Massachusetts, and in every state of the country. This is a great organizing tool, and there is no issue more important than overturning Citizens United.
I'm going to throw you two more issue questions, and then I'm going to take you into some political strategy here. But first off, I noticed that our friend Tom Hayden just entered the room. And over there. And Tom would ask you about a dozen different questions, and maybe will over the next couple days. But I was reminded by his presence, by some presence of Francis and so many other people in this room. You talk about takeovers of our government. You talk about influence on our government. Isn't there a reality that Dwight Eisenhower was onto something when he spoke about a military-industrial complex and its dominant role, not merely in foreign policy, but also in domestic policy, by diverting so much of our resources to an ever-expanding military budget and to, conflicts that you have often been a rather lonely critic of?
The short answer is yes.
There we go. Okay, next.
And you think back, no, and it's a funny thing when you think about Eisenhower. Eisenhower, in his time, was a moderate Republican. The Dwight D. Eisenhowers of the world could not walk into the door of the Republican Party today. Couldn't get in there. They'd be much too radical. And if you think about the courage, here was a guy who was a 4-star general who led the Allied efforts in Europe against the Nazis. And he ends, after being 8 years the President of the United States, says, I'm President of the United States, and I'm surrounded. This is back in, what are we now, back in 1960.
61. Yeah.
61, just before he left office. And he said, I'm surrounded by all of these lobbyists who want more and more money for the military. I know something about the military. I was a 4-star general. And yet, their power is extraordinary. I would say that compared to 1961, the power of the military-industrial complex has certainly significantly increased. And it is no great secret, I think everybody knows it, that what they do is spread their jobs, and we're talking about millions of jobs, all across this country. So if you're a congressman in a district, that has 500 jobs making a weapons system, and you're thinking of voting against that weapons system or voting against the budget, they're going to say, there goes that Nichols, he's costing us 500 jobs. And they do this, very thoughtfully. They know what they're doing. So they are a, very, very powerful force. At the end of the day, the bottom line is, without getting into a long, long discussion of foreign policy or defense, everybody in the room should know that in the United States, we spend almost as much, not quite, almost as much as the rest of the world combined on defense. Almost as much. So you have countries in Europe who provide national health care to all of their people. Their kids go to school go to college for free, and yet we're spending far, far more per capita than any other country on earth. So do we need to take a very hard look at military spending? Obviously we do. And the other point that I would make, and again, this is the media, and this is, in a sense, the weakness of the Democratic Party. In my view, George W. Bush will go down in history as one of the worst presidents in American history. But nobody talks about George Bush anymore. Is that true? Yeah. The president doesn't talk about George W. Bush. That's ancient history. And the point that I bring up is that Bush got us into a war that many of us understood we should never have gotten into, and that is the war in Iraq. And it really, again, this is media, but it just drives me nuts. The Republicans who voted for the war in Iraq, voted for the war in Afghanistan, voted for tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires, voted for a Medicare Part D prescription drug program without paying for any of that. And then Obama became president, and you know what? They were really worried about the deficit. Oh my God! We got to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, kids programs. We have this terrible deficit. And the media and many of us have allowed them to get away with that. So when I'm on the budget committee, one of the fun things about being on the Senate, you're on a million committees. I'm on the budget committee. And when we sit around, I say, as the major budget hawk, major deficit hawk here amongst us, I voted against the war. I voted against the tax breaks for the billionaires. You guys all voted for those things. So don't tell me about cutting the deficit.
Senator, you are enormously popular with librarians, which intriguingly enough relates to the NSA debate. And long before a lot of people in Washington were talking about the NSA, a lot of people in Washington were talking about spying on the American people, you took on this battle with on behalf of librarians. And you have carried it forward. I think it is one of the under-discussed parts of your brief as a senator, is a defense of privacy rights.
Yes. When I was in the House, in the wake of 9/11, the Bush people brought out an agenda which was sitting in somebody's back pocket for many, many years. And in a very frightened nation, the USA Patriot Act was passed. There weren't many of us in the House or the Senate to vote against it. I voted against it. And I voted...
That's right.
And then later on, I voted against the reauthorization of the USA Patriot Act. And in terms of libraries, here was what was very... Librarians came up to me. We have a fairly active librarians community in Vermont. They said, Bernie, look, this is what's in the USA Patriot Act. If the FBI or a law enforcement agency goes to a librarian and says, I want to know what Mary Jones is reading, what did she take out? You give me the records and tell me what she was reading. And by the way, it would be against the law for you to tell her that we are investigating. And it's the same point with booksellers. You go to booksellers, what did Harry Smith buy at the bookstore? We need to know that, and don't tell Harry about that. So it seemed to me that the last thing in the world you want, all these guys talk about freedom. What does freedom mean? We don't talk about that. Freedom. Well, freedom is not the government looking over your shoulder in terms of the books you're taking out of a library or the books you are buying. That is not freedom. To me, do I believe that there are folks out there who are would like to do damage to the United States through a terrorist act? I do. Do I believe we have to be strong in protecting the American people and other people around the world? I do. But I absolutely believe that we can do that without undermining the constitutional rights of the American people. It's as simple as all that.
And Nancy Tillinian, I think, is right there, from longtime activist with the Bill of Rights Defense Committee and many other efforts to maintain privacy rights and the Fourth Amendment and other amendments. And you know what she told me that was a very interesting thing? She said your office used to call her every week to make sure that the organizing was going on around the country and that cities across this country were passing resolutions to defend the Bill of Rights. Right. And so it was a very interesting thing because this is one of the dynamics of this inside-outside strategy as a U.S. Senator, that you talk about it in Washington, but you're also very interested in what's going on around the country.
Absolutely. And on even these issues, what's interesting, you have some honest conservatives. How can you be? There are conservatives out there who are really honest, not Koch brothers types, but people who just believe in small government. Leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. I don't want the government getting involved in healthcare, education, all that stuff. Okay. Well, how can you possibly defend a small government position and have the United States collecting data on every phone call that you make or the books that you read? That is not... And this is an opportunity, I think, to develop some alliances with some honest conservatives out there.
So many other issues. Oh, by the way, Seattle just did a $15 minimum wage. Is that okay by you?
Yes, it is.
All right, just checking. All right. So you going to run for president?
Why did I think you would...
Yeah, no, let me just... Yeah, I wasn't going to bring the issue up, but there's a woman in the second row there, and she took the Bernie Sanders for U.S. Senate pin, and she worked over the bottom and put president on. So I thought I'd better ask you.
Well, let me be honest and to say, tell you what I have said when I'm asked this, and that is very, very honestly, I am enormously proud. Just you can understand it. I am and independent. And I love my state, I love the people of my state, and I'm enormously proud to represent them in the United States Senate, and that's the simple truth. And I think that anybody who wakes up in the morning who really wants to be president of the United States is a little bit crazy. Because the problems facing this country are so enormous, and the opposition of the billionaire class is so powerful, you gotta be a little bit nuts to do that. But this is when I also wake up in the morning. I mean, I take this stuff, I dream about this stuff. This is 24 hours, 7 days a week for me. It's always on my mind. It pains me very much. Again, my dad came to this country, he loved this country. Not a political guy, came here at the age of 17 without a nickel in his pocket, and ended up being a very proud American because it gave him opportunities he never would have had in Poland. And millions, your families often have the same story. A great, country which God knows from slavery on has had very serious problems, but also a country of huge promise and hope, a country that has been for a long, long time the envy of the world, people coming here, looking to America, our ideals, our economics, middle class, all that. And it pains me very, very much in terms of what is happening in this country, the collapse of the middle class, the gap between the very rich and everybody else. And it pains me also that it is quite possible you may have a presidential election where the major issues facing our country will virtually not be discussed at all. So how do you go and have an election where the issue of oligarchy is not being discussed? How do you have an election where we don't talk about the fact that real unemployment is not 6.3, it's close to 12%, counting those people who've given up looking for work and who are working part-time. Youth unemployment, close to 20%. African-American youth unemployment, close to 40%. How do you have an election where somebody is not standing up and saying, if we don't tomorrow boldly and aggressively transform our energy system and reverse global warming, we may not have much of a planet that we're going to leave to our kids and our grandchildren. Those issues and many more that all of you know. And all of you have, other issues out there. The issue of civil liberties that John just talked about, and many others. We cannot ignore those issues. So what I have said is, on the other hand, what I understand is that running for president of the United States is very, very serious business. I don't think the Koch brothers will be supportive. Could be wrong. I don't think Wall Street or the drug companies will be supportive. And it will not do anybody any good if somebody like me ran and didn't get many votes. It could be a negative. So what I am assessing right now, and it's easy to talk, I can give you all the great speeches. But this I do know, by the way, and we talk about political revolution in America and the things that have to change. Anybody, Bernie Sanders, anybody else, who thinks that he or she could become president without the active support of a huge, emboldened grassroots movement is crazy. There is no way in the world that you can take on the big money interests without involving millions and millions of people. For example, right now, just to give you one example of 100, we're dealing with the issue of the fact that college is increasingly becoming unaffordable and that millions of people are chained, who graduated college or graduate school, are chained to unbelievably high debts. Half the young people in my office have debts of $50,000, $100,000 a year. Go to law school, medical school, $100,000, $200,000.
There's a young woman out there who just raised her hand and said that's her.
All right.
Over
The only thing that I want to say, over 100, did you go to graduate school? Well, there you go. All right. She is in serious trouble because she has to pay back that debt. She doesn't have a job.
Can I just interrupt by saying, is that your mother sitting next to you? Just a friend.
Okay.
If it was your mother, you'd be in really serious trouble. All right.
This is young people all over this country. Now, the point is, we're going to bring up legislation soon. We are not going to get the Republicans, I think, to support it. Do you know how we change that? You know how we deal with your debt? you and a few million other young people march on Washington, make the politicians aware of what is going on. So the point is, you ask me, if you just had the smartest, best person in the White House who did not have the active, and I'm talking about it in a way that you have not envisaged yet. No president, no progressive president can succeed unless there are millions and millions and millions of people actively involved in the struggle every single day. If anybody in this room thinks, well, gee, I hope Bernie runs for president, I'll vote for him, I'll support him, I'll send him $25, and I'll wish him the best of luck. It doesn't work that way. Bernie Sanders or any other serious person cannot succeed against the opposition we face today. The billions of dollars that will be thrown against. Give you an example. Can I, John? I'm going off the deep end here, I know that. Conservative friend of mine in the Senate, conservative guy, honest guy, decent guy. He said, Bernie, I'm working on a kind of a modest piece of legislation regarding the reform of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mae. And I don't even know what their bill is. It's not going to be a revolutionary bill. It's a modest bill. And this is what he told me. This is a conservative Republican. I think there were 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, all moderate to conservative, working on this piece of legislation. I don't know if it's any good or not, okay? Probably not, to tell you the truth. But this is how bad the situation is. This guy is in a safe seat, safe Republican seat. He is not up for re-election, not up for re-election. The moneyed interests who feel threatened by this legislation are putting radio and television ads big time in his state right now. He's not even up for election. All he is doing is sponsoring a modest piece of legislation, one that would probably be too conservative for most of us. But the message is, don't even think about it. You think about bringing forth a modest piece of legislation that might impact Wall Street. We got ads going up in your state, and you're not even running for election. Think about what happens when you run. That's what we are up against. So if somebody like me were elected president of the United States, you know what happened the day after? You know what would be on television? You know every scandal that would take place, so-called scandal, that the CNNs and the ABCs would be talking about day after day after day? And how do you defeat that? That's what you have to think about. Because if I give you an example of, honest to God, a conservative Republican being attacked by Wall Street because they came up with a modest proposal, think about what would happen when we demanded the rich and the large corporations to start paying their fair share of taxes. What would happen? So the point is, it's not whether, I run or not, something that I'm thinking about, going to Iowa next week, talk to people there. No, this is the point. I don't say the same thing to people in Iowa, not me. Neither I nor anybody else can succeed unless, in a sense, there is a political revolution, and that is that millions of people are mobilized, are not just looking at CNN and ABC, but are getting real information about real issues and are mobilized and are prepared to fight. That is the absolute truth. We cannot make changes. It's not good enough anymore to elect even good presidents or good senators. We need a bold and aggressive grassroots movement that this country has never seen in its modern history.
Anybody got a question for the senator? Boy, there's a hand that went right up right away. Connor, Michael, can I give you here we go. You are a man of many values here. I think it's on. I can take that woman right there. Take you next, sir.
I'd like to address this question.
Cut.
Can you make it? There you go.
I'd like to address this question to both you, Senator, and you, John Nichols, because I certainly appreciate what you're doing, Senator Sanders, and the constitutional amendment, and because you, Mr. Nichols, have written about constitutions and you have studied constitutions. All of us are in favor, in this room anyway, of repealing the Citizens United, the McCutcheon decision. We all would like to see a constitutional amendment that gives everyone in this country the right to vote and have that vote count. However, we do know that there are 16 states so far that have come forward and want a constitutional convention. I just read an article in Governing Magazine by Mr. Kettle, and he says there are 20 states that want the conservative agenda to come forth, such as requiring the United States to have a balanced budget and giving more opportunity for gun rights protections, and also to repeal marriage equality. So my question is this: if they reach the goal of 34 states ahead of the progressives, will they have delegates that absolutely control the convention, or will the progressives also get to introduce their amendment suggestions?
I think talking about what you're talking about is a constitutional convention. And I would have great trepidation about that. I don't think it's going to happen, and I don't think it should happen. I think our goal should be, and there are, I don't know if we're talking about the same thing, there are some 16 or 17 states that have gone on record in wanting to overturn Citizens United. That's not a constitutional convention. That is a constitutional amendment. And as I said earlier, we're going to come up with a constitutional amendment. It's going to get a vote in the U.S. Senate. It probably will not get 60 votes, but it'll get 50 some odd votes. It will not pass in the House, but it will give the American people something to rally around. So I'm not in favor of a constitutional convention. I am in favor of a constitutional amendment.
And I would quickly say I'll come to New Hampshire and do a talk on constitutional amendments for you sometime soon. But look, the state of Vermont, your home state, just did suggest basically by any means necessary to get rid of Citizens United. And I think there's a lot of churn on that. But rather than go into it in a deep way and just say, as somebody who's written about this for a long time, I'm blown away by what a grassroots movement has done. I am absolutely amazed. 16 states, more than 600 communities now. There are two movements in this country that are absolutely shifting things at a fundamental level from the grassroots. One of them is get money out of politics. The other one is a $15 minimum wage, which is blowing my mind. And so I would say that things will happen at the top level. I'm most fascinated by what's happening at the grassroots level. And I think before anything happens, constitutional convention or constitutional amendment, there's a lot more grassroots that has to happen. Let's take this young man right here. Did I lower your age for you? All right.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I think one of the issues you brought up, everything you say needs to be said, and most people aren't hearing these things. And maybe the most important is that people need to get involved. I think we've gotten accustomed to just pulling a lever once every 4 years and think that's the end of it. But why don't people get involved? And I think that has a lot to do with, cynicism. Even Obama, putting Monsanto in charge of food safety and things like this. You're just like, it's hopeless. But I hate to say this, but I have the same issues here a little bit. My friend just asked me, well, after you made a pitch for people to get involved, which I agree is totally necessary, he said, would you go work for him? For you. And in my mind, I'm saying, I'd sure like to. He's saying the things that need to be said. However, there's a couple of issues that you've acted that are opposite of that and that blow my mind. In Burlington, there's a lot of good people working hard to stop basing the F-35. This is the military-industrial complex at its strongest. And you came out in favor of basing it there. Secondary, another issue is the climate change issue. You've said a lot of good things, but then when it comes to acting, you know, biomass, which is tree burning, is the worst thing you can do for carbon. We've tried over and over, people have tried to talk about that, and the science says very strongly that burning trees is pretty stupid. So the point is, we can say things, point fingers, it comes down to what we do. And I don't see how you could possibly support the F-35 based on all these things.
Good
And
questions.
I'll
All
leave
right.
the
Well,
other
let me
one
give you
alone.
good questions. I don't support the F-35. This is what I do support. Whether you like it, or I like it, or anybody else likes it, the fact of the matter is the F-35 is the cutting-edge plane, the fighter plane, for the United States Air Force, Navy, and NATO. That's a fact. Do you deny that? You don't think it is? It is the, well, you may think it doesn't work. The Department of Defense does think it works. All right, I don't want to, all right.
I'm not going to let the two of you get into a debate about the technicals of planes,
Right.
because I don't know the answer, but I do want, I
Let
think
me
he's
just
asked
answer
a good
the question.
and
Now,
there you
I'm
go.
not in it. NATO, countries all over the world, that is going to be their plane. So the question for me is the plane for the National Guard? We right now have the F-16 in Burlington. It employs hundreds of people. It provides a college education for hundreds of people. So for me, the question is not whether we have the F-35 or not. It is here. The question for me is whether it is located in Burlington, Vermont, or whether it is located in Florida. That's the issue. It is not whether you're going to build the F-35. That decision was made. You may not like it. You may talk appropriately about cost overruns. That's true. It is here. So you're not going to get rid of, I don't believe, the F-35. It is here. The question of where it is located. In terms of biomass, okay? I have introduced, along with Senator Barbara Boxer, the most comprehensive climate change legislation in the history of the United States, including a significant tax on carbon. I am doing my best. And in Vermont have brought in fact, throughout this country, a whole lot of money for weatherization, energy efficiency. The future of America in terms of energy has got to be primarily energy efficiency and weatherizations. That is the easiest way to do it, the cheapest way to do it. But second of all, we need to move towards sustainable energies. The sustainable energies are solar. I've introduced legislation for 10 million solar rooftops. Work with the Vermont National Guard so that 25% of their electricity now comes from solar. Wind, worked very hard to bring wind into the state of Vermont, all over this country. Geothermal, held conferences on a growing technology in Vermont. Heat pumps and biomass. Is biomass perfect? What's the danger of biomass? Let me finish, all right? You had your chance. The danger is you don't want to do deforestation. You have to harvest appropriately. In New England, fine, you disagree. But in New England and around the country, we do have a lot of trees. If you harvest appropriately, in my view, and use that technology, in Vermont, more and more people are heating their homes, not with oil, they're heating their homes with wood. Maybe you disagree with that. That's what people are doing. It is cheaper. So the question is, you have to do the harvesting in a technically intelligent way. Otherwise, you're going to have a serious problem. But I do believe that biomass is one form of an alternative to oil. But last point, this is my last point and the more important point. You disagree with me on the F-35? You disagree with me on biomass? Therefore, you're not going to participate. Up. Let me finish. Let me finish. And it's not just you. I hear this very, very often, and this is the point that I'm making. I only agree with you 98% of the time. Not good enough. Well, I disagree. I respect your different point of view. Okay, that's my view. All right.
But I also appreciate the prodding question, because this is one of the great challenges, because there are places where a candidate, be they for the Senate or the presidency, learns along the way from the people and the questions that come from us. Thank you for your good questions. Now, let's take a couple more. Let's say that woman over there in the just in front of Hayden over there. What's that? We'll get over there too.
I really appreciate your comments on movement building. So this is a really quick two-part question. The first is, what organizing work do you see around the country that excites you the most? And then I think the second question is what, if any, of the work going on in key campaigns has the billionaire class worried, if anything?
Well, I think John touched on two areas. I'll give you an example in terms of Citizens United. A couple of months ago, I did a conference call with young people on 100 campuses. And I thought the issue would be climate change. I thought the issue might be women's rights, whatever it would be. It turns out to be campaign finance. And John is right. We have 600 communities all over America, including many in Vermont, who have come on record in terms of overturning the desire, the need to overturn Citizens United. So I see that is hugely important. The second issue is obviously economic, building on the work that the Occupy Wall Street people have done. And right now, I think the focus is on raising the minimum wage. There was a minimum wage vote in the Senate a few weeks ago. We got one Republican to support it. We needed 60 votes, and we missed by 5 or 6 votes. But all over this country, on the ballots, in state after state, are efforts to raise the minimum wage. Now, let me just conclude that by telling you something that was very poignant to me. A couple of weeks ago, I was in North Carolina, and the SEIU union had brought together young people, mostly African American, some Hispanic, some white. These were mostly young people, although some had kids, who were fighting to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And how incredibly brave these young people were in the South, in rural areas, standing up for a decent minimum wage just inspired me, and I think it will inspire you as well. So those are the two issues. I think John is right. Those are two, right now, very dynamic grassroots efforts.
We got somebody over here who wants to ask a question. Gentleman right there. Michael will come through you, Mike. Here he comes.
So I was wondering that could the big problem with the military-industrial complex and excessive costs be solved without losing the jobs by returning to the federally run armories that exist in this country since its founding until Reagan shut them down in the 80s?
Well, I think, good point. I think,
let me come off him for one sec and say that having written a book about Dick Cheney great mission as vice president was privatization of so much of the military and really making it into this huge profit-making operation for a lot of big companies. Just to come off what I think what you're giving us there.
all right, just first of all, I'm a very strong supporter of the National Guard, which is what you're talking about, I think, right? Why is that? Because the National Guard is there 365 days a year, and with climate change, you're going to probably need them more to deal with a variety of emergencies, floods and tornadoes and everything else. So I think your point is well taken, that we should buttress up and support and strengthen the National Guards around the country. Secondly, there is no question, and we talked about the military-industrial complex, that there are weapon systems out there that we don't need. There are nuclear programs that we don't need. So I think, I can't tell you that there will not be jobs loss. But on the other hand, what we should be understanding is that if you want a jobs program, rebuild our crumbling infrastructure.
Yeah, a little more. He has one more element he wants to. What do you got?
I was talking more about like the Springfield Armory, those federally run arms manufacturers.
Actually, have it done by the government rather than the private sector.
I'm just not, I apologize, I'm not familiar enough with that issue.
Let's see. Let's take a couple. We've got a woman in the middle there. I always like a woman in the middle there. He's going to hand you a mic.
Well, for one thing, I just want to state that Massachusetts is right up there, both on the asking for the constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and considering now the minimum wage tied to inflation.
Great.
Very good.
But I also want to say to you what I said to Elizabeth Warren before she even opened her campaign office. I could feel the climate in Massachusetts. I can't feel the climate in the rest of the country. But grassroots organizing needs you as much as you need us. Somebody has to start it, and it's going to take something we've never seen before, and I can't think of anyone more capable than you.
Thank you.
The smart potential candidate doesn't say anything after that.
Thank you, is what I'll say.
Although I will, let me prod for 1 second, then we'll take a couple more questions here. And I promise you we won't keep you here all night, although this guy will stay all night and answer your questions.
Well,
but
no.
one thing that's kind of lost to your history, or at least not always known to everyone, is you were actually a very enthusiastic supporter of Jesse Jackson's candidacy for the presidency in 1988, the Rainbow Coalition. And so you have seen what comes of running a dissident presidential campaign. What did you learn from that Rainbow experience, but also what could you do differently? Because, at least to my view, unfortunately, Jesse Jackson didn't quite make it to the presidency.
I would say that Jesse Jackson's role in history has not been fully appreciated. You know, he gets criticized for this and criticized for that. But the fact that we had an African American running in Iowa, standing next to farmers, white farmers in Iowa, bringing people together all over this country was no small thing, no small thing. And he did it in Vermont as well. And you know what I remember mostly from his campaign, and I'm an independent, and for the first time in my life, I supported Jackson. And he was on the ballot in Vermont, and I went to the Democratic caucus. And I got slapped in the face by a woman. She was not happy about my presence in the caucus. But
Sorry, was this because you were an independent?
yeah, because she didn't think I should be in that room at that time. But Jackson's role, Barack Obama would not be president of the United States if not for Jesse Jackson's campaigns back then in making Americans aware that you had black leadership that was capable of being president. And I thought he ran a really strong campaign, bringing together the economic issues, the social issues. No, I think it was very, very impressive, historical.
So is your... But to press you on that, if you were to consider a presidential race, ideally you would do better.
Gee, John, you know that. You figured that out, yes?
Yes. Are the times more serious? Are the issues more pressing? What would be different now than 1988?
Well, it's hard to say. I think, if anything, the problems are more serious right now than they were back then, as serious as they were back then. I think here's the challenge. This will surprise you as well. As you know, the Koch brothers helped fund the startup of the Tea Party. You all know that? And yet, if the Tea Party people ever knew what the Koch brothers believed, they would not be in the Tea Party. So the challenge to me, this is the interesting challenge, is that when you should know is the Koch brothers, want to abolish Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That's not what the average working class person of the Tea Party believes. So the challenge would be, and it would be an enormous challenge, could we take people in this room and work with people who on some issues are very, very different, but also have a great deal of skepticism about Wall Street and big money and Citizens United. If we can develop that kind of coalition around economic issues, you could probably transform the country. That's an interesting challenge.
Let's get this woman right here. Grab her, this woman right here. Take a couple more here.
Just to add to what you've been talking about in recent comments, I appreciate what you said about Jesse Jackson. I look back to Howard Dean and how he ran a very grassroots campaign, talked about universal health care and all kinds of things that were controversial at the time, and marriage equality before people were calling it marriage. I think Obama would not have been nearly as successful if there wasn't a Howard Dean. In terms of, I think he learned from that campaign and ran an incredible grassroots campaign. Now, we live in a country that is, as you said, a lot of people are more united on some issues, divided on others, but if we could only come together and get over ourselves once in a while, we would be much more effective. I think that happened in Obama's second campaign. To think that we have still a fairly redneck, racist country in many, many ways. We have a very erudite, introspective president, more so than I've ever seen in my lifetime. Whatever I disagree with him about, he's kind of an incredible person in many, many ways. He talks about the redistribution of wealth, which really helped to get Martin Luther King killed. And he talks about it fairly openly. What he's doing, I know you probably know a lot more than I do, but he talks about that openly. I can't imagine that there wouldn't be a better time for you to step in and run a really effective grassroots campaign around economic disparity.
Well, I mean, clearly if I did run, you heard me tonight, that would be the issue. When I talk about the facts of income and wealth distribution, the fact that 24 hedge fund managers last year made more money than 425,000 public school teachers. Who in America think that makes sense? Very few people. So I think sometimes the reason that I think we might possibly do well, I think the anger out there and the frustration and the disgust is a lot higher than the political and media establishment believe that it is.
Let me, I'm looking around, we're getting a little bit later in the evening, and so as I look, I see that woman right there.
Maybe one more after
Yeah, that woman right there is, I think, yeah, you got a microphone coming your way.
One more after
Yeah, I got you.
Thank you for coming. I found out, I'm one of the younger folks here, I guess, and I found out through a friend of mine who's also a teacher at the middle school here in Northampton, and she was mentioning that she wanted more young people to come out, and so I was like, what? Bernie Sanders is in Northampton? Anyway, my question is about, I'd like to hear you speak about the connection between income inequality and poverty and public education and how that ties into like race to the top and then, you know, all of that stuff and pretty much what are your thoughts on that as far as where we can go from here?
Okay, in 2 minutes, here goes. Clearly we need a fundamental rethinking of education. Probably at the first level, you know what we need to do is determine that education and intellectual activity is actually important. Not quite as important as football. Let's agree on that. But somewhere up there. I was in South Carolina, in Charlotte, South Carolina, meeting with high school teachers. And they were great. And they got up and they said, you know, it's not just the money that bothers us, is we work really, really hard and we don't get a whole lot of respect. All right, so we got to respect education. And we have to thank teachers, and thank you, by the way. Not an easy job. And this is also what we have to learn. Every psychologist who ever studied the issue tells us that the most formative years of a human being's life are what? 0 to 3. And you know what we pay child care workers in this country? We pay them lower than McDonald's workers. They don't have health care. They should be some of the best paid. When you talk about a revolution in America, if you believe in your kids, those should be some of the best paid, best trained people in America. And if the question is, do I believe in No Child Left Behind and testing and testing and testing? No, I do not. But the other thing also that we have to do is if kids know, you know, kids learn at a very early age, really early age. What age kids do you teach? 8th grade special ed, all right. That's a special, thank you. Kids in the 8th grade, they got to figure it out already. They know if they're going to go to college. They know if they're going to make it to the middle class or not. Think about what America would look like if every kid in this country, regardless of the income of his or her family, knew that if he or she studied hard, worked hard, that kid would be able to go to college and make it to the middle class. What a very different country we would be in. So there's a lot to talk about education, but I think the most important thing is education should be part of our lives from day one to the last day on earth. And clearly, we need a major transformation of how we do education to make that happen in this country. All right. John,
Senator, now, we have gone through a couple hours tonight, and folks have been wonderfully patient and asked some great questions. I want to circle us around to one thing, and I'm going to bet this is a question you still don't have an answer to. Maybe you do, though. When I interviewed you a couple months ago, about this possibility, and you said you were pondering a presidential run, you said at that time you were not sure whether you would run as a Democrat or an independent. Have you sorted that out yet?
Nope.
Still working on it?
Well, let me just very briefly deal with that. All right, here's the issue. What's the advantage of running as an independent? The advantage of running independent is right now, most people in this country do not have a lot of faith in either political party. So when you say, you're an independent, people say, well, you're not a Democrat or a Republican. That's pretty good. All right. What's the disadvantage? Big disadvantage. Big disadvantage is, if I were, you would have to build an entire political infrastructure. That in itself would cost a huge amount of money and require people to do nothing else but try to get you on the ballot. We want to be talking about issues, right? Now, getting on the ballot is important, and we got to explain democracy to folks as well. But more importantly, our energy should be talking about national health care, distribution of wealth, and all of the issues that we feel strongly about. And do we want to spend our whole time? And I was told when I was in North Carolina, they said, oh, if you ran as an independent, no, you couldn't get on the ballot. So how do you run a serious campaign for president if for a variety of reasons it's almost impossible to get on the ballot? So those are the things that I'm weighing, and I look forward. Now, I understand that that here there is a perspective. And once you're in, if you run as a Democrat, what's the advantage? It's kind of easy to get on the ballot. You're in the debates. That's a big deal. The media can't quite ignore you, right? All right. So that's kind of where we're at.
So you're wrestling with this issue. And Senator Sanders, I want to emphasize to you something. People who are thinking, even pondering on the wildest dreams of maybe running for president of the United States, they usually fly in, they stop at the tarmac at the airport, they do a press conference, and they leave. Maybe they come into town, but they come fast and they leave fast. Senator Sanders, at the behest of Tim Carpenter. Senator Sanders is here tonight for this conversation. He's going to come back again tomorrow morning for PDA's gathering and continue the conversation and speak about some of the issues he's concerned on. And I want to thank him, because as somebody who covers politics for a living, he is proving me wrong when I say that nobody ever runs for president or even thinks about it the old-fashioned way of actually going out and talking to people. I think that is a very big deal. I think you've been a part of a beginning of a very important conversation. Before we finish up tonight, I did not call on any of the PDA folks here tonight because I wanted to have, because I know there's folks from many different perspectives here. But Connor Boylan and Mimi Kennedy from Progressive Democrats of America I would let them have the last part of our conversation tonight, and I think they are bringing something up they want to present to you.
We have some signatures, because one of the last emails that Tim Carpenter sent around to the staff was
He reminded us teamwork, keep it a community, stay strong, and get more signatures for Bernie, 10,000 in building. And so, Bernie, we want you to look in this box and see the signatures. Oh, it appears to be empty. But we have the USB thumb drive with 12,000 signatures. 12,000 signatures. Bernie, run as a Democrat. Run as a Democrat. Run as a Democrat. Run, Bernie, run. Run as a Democrat. Make those primaries interesting. Bring up the issues. Make us proud that there's actually a Democratic Party the way it should be. All right.
Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.